I'm the only woman at my IT job and now I know why. I was fresh out of college and really wanted to get a job that wasn't serving burgers, cleaning stores, or making coffee for old guys. I sent out about 6 job applications a week and went to maybe half that many interviews. I knew that my English degree wasn't in high demand, but I thought I'd find something good. I was still hopeful, though, and only applied for office jobs with benefits. It wasn't great for my bank account, but it made me feel a little better about myself. About 3 weeks ago, I had a phone interview with an internet security company called Proficient Technologies. They had offices all over the country and were looking for someone to help customers in their international department. You needed a nice voice, good grammar, some computer skills, and you had to work day and night shifts. The office was only 2 subway stops from my apartment and they offered health insurance. Even though I didn't know much about computers, I decided to apply. The phone interview went well, and after a couple more meetings, they offered me the job, a really good offer, considering I had no experience. For my first week, I had to work the regular 9 to 5 shifts so I could be online at the same time as my manager, who was in a different city. After that, I'd work a 4-day cycle of 1 day shift, 1 night shift, and 2 days off. On my first day, I dressed up in a nice sweater and long skirt. I knew that most IT departments are full of guys, and I didn't want to stand out by dressing in a way that could be seen as too revealing. The guy at the front desk seemed normal enough. He said his name was Tom and helped me with some paperwork. Then, he took me to a desk in a big open office space. As we walked, I couldn't look at the men sitting at the desks. I didn't see any other girls, which was strange and made me feel a bit uneasy. Even though Tom was friendly, it felt like everyone else was giving me the cold shoulder. It felt like they were all saying, "You don't belong here," in their heads. I was surprised when Tom stopped at a desk that was covered in silly pictures printed from the internet, bright pink stickers, and a small, old teddy bear keychain. Everything else was covered in dust, including the keyboard, monitor, and the whole desk. "Oh, what the heck?" Tom muttered, looking annoyed. "I'm so sorry," he said, looking down at my paperwork. "Gemma, this desk was supposed to be cleaned ages ago. I'll have to talk to the person who cleans." "That's all right," I replied. "I can just wipe it down myself, no problem." Tom didn't seem sure about that, but he looked around the room, and there weren't any other empty desks. The rest of the day was a blur. I learned about my tasks, which included answering phone calls about customer issues and making notes in the system. I also had to read all the messages people sent and sort them by how important they were and what the problem was. I wasn't expected to give any technical advice, but I had to learn all about the software. Since I wasn't answering calls yet, I started reading the instruction manual. I didn't understand much of it, so I spent a lot of time looking things up on Google, like networks, testing, database security, and other stuff. Right before lunch, my manager checked in and seemed a little disappointed that I didn't know much. I felt like I was failing, so I took a break and decided to clean the desk. I stood up to find Tom and ask him for a cleaning cloth. I wished I hadn't done that. Every single person in the room looked at me the moment I got up. I didn't look back to confirm, but it was so quiet that it was almost scary as I walked through the office space. The usual clicking of keyboards had stopped, and I felt my face get hot and self-conscious. I started to slouch a bit, trying to make myself less noticeable. Before I turned towards the front desk area, I forced myself to look at one of the guys who was staring at me. I don't know what I was expecting, but when I saw this hooded programmer with a sneer on his face, I got a shiver down my spine. He looked about my age, but he didn't seem embarrassed or uncomfortable at all. He had a mean smile on his lips as he looked at my ankles before turning back to his computer screen. I wondered what he'd do if I looked at his long, spotty neck the same way. He acted the same way when I came back to my desk with a box of cleaning wipes. There was one good thing that happened that day. While I was cleaning the desk drawers, I found an almost empty notebook from the person who worked there before me. She didn't write her first name, just an initial and her last name, S. Brooks. But based on the decorations on her desk, I was sure she was a girl just like me. Finding her things made me feel a bit better. But the best thing was the notebook. She had written a simpler explanation of the whole manual, using easy-to-understand words and explaining the confusing terms and instructions. With her help, I was able to surprise my manager with how much I knew at the end of the day. After a long day, I decided to check out the kitchen before heading home. Tom had said they had a great coffee machine and snacks, and I was really hungry after all the mental and emotional effort. Plus, I was completely broke, so I wanted to grab some cookies. As I got closer to the kitchen, I could hear people chatting and laughing. I foolishly hoped that the people who hung out in the kitchen would be nicer, friendlier, or at least polite. Instead, the whole kitchen went silent as soon as I walked in. There were 5 men of different ages and sizes sitting around a cheap-looking table, all looking at me. "Rough first day?" asked a sarcastic voice in a medium tone. I looked up from the floor tiles and scanned the faces to see who was talking. It wasn't hard to recognize the confident hooded guy who had stared me down earlier. "You must be very experienced," he continued in a snarky way, pushing a strand of greasy black hair out of his eyes. "To get such a great job, you must be a real whiz. What is this, high school?" I blurted out. I'm not usually the type to start fights, but this was too much. It's one thing to be treated poorly, another thing to feel awkward, but this was starting to feel like a cheesy 80s movie with grown-ups playing teenagers. "I'm just here for some coffee, and if you don't believe I deserve this job, you can tell HR." I went on, enjoying the shocked and nervous expressions on the faces of the guy's friends. Good, I wanted them to feel a little bit of the uncomfortable feeling I had been dealing with all day. I decided to get my snacks far away from my coworkers, so I went back to my desk with my coffee, holding my head high. Just as I was about to sit down and enjoy my coffee, I saw a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "You have quite an attitude, don't you?" I froze, standing near my desk with my coffee in one hand and my phone in the other. I was trying to understand what was happening when I got 2 more messages in the same chat window. One was a naked picture I had sent to my first real boyfriend in college. The second message said, "Hi, don't you take that photo to HR?" Obviously, I was really upset that someone had violated my privacy. I felt ashamed and angry that I had drawn so much unwanted attention to myself. This was all my fault. I had come to work in an office full of ethical hackers who used a common dog name as their password. It was clear that the picture had been shared around because of that creepy coworker, and now everyone in the office was laughing at me. I left my coffee untouched, signed off my computer, and went home. I held back my tears until I was safely on the subway. I cried for most of the night, replaying the day's events in my head and feeling sick every time I imagined my coworkers looking at my naked body. Around 3 a.m., though, I realized that I couldn't just keep feeling sorry for myself. I needed to come up with a plan if I was going to survive working there. Quitting wasn't an option because the pay was too good to pass up. Besides, I was barely getting by, eating mostly pizza. My next option was to talk to HR, but I wasn't going to go there. There was no way to prove who had sent me those messages. My last option? Just stay, keep my head down, do the job, and ignore any more attempts to bother me. So that's what I did. For the rest of the training week, I arrived on time and never left my desk except to use the bathroom. I avoided contact with everyone and looked only at things that weren't people. Thanks to S. Brooks, I kept up with my training. For every new task from my manager, there was a corresponding entry in her notebook. There were no more scary texts or confrontations in person, but there was something else that started making me nervous again. Last Friday was my final day of training, which led me to the last entry in the notebook. Night shift survival guide: sleep during the day before your shift and don't fall asleep. Don't let anyone in. Keep pepper spray close. Check every aisle, meeting room. Don't forget to check under desks, balcony, kitchen tables, behind cooler. Have Skype open with money in your account for emergencies in case you can't use your phone. Check in with a friend, family member, partner every hour. The list didn't make much sense. First, HR had told me I could sleep between 2 and 5 a.m., as long as I kept my work phone nearby. They even had a couch in one of the conference rooms for that purpose. Second, the whole job was about answering calls, so I could always call from the office phone, right? And lastly, the safety precautions in the guide seemed extreme and paranoid. Maybe the list was a joke? Maybe Brooks felt just as uncomfortable as I did with all the quiet, leering male coworkers? Even though my brain was trying to make sense of the list, a nagging feeling in my gut told me I was missing something important. It hit me as I was leaving work on Friday, my last day of training. "Tom," I asked him hesitantly, "could I ask you a question?" "Of course," he replied, smiling warmly. He seemed so much nicer than the grumpy guys in the main room. I was wondering why I haven't seen any of the other customer service people. I mean, there should be at least 3 more people to cover the 4-day rotation, right? You need to ask your manager about that. Most likely they're scattered across the country. It's pretty common, he answered, already dismissing me as he finished his work for the week. Was there someone else who worked here before me? I continued, wanting to know more about the girl whose notebook I had been using all week. Yes, another girl worked in this position for a short time, Tom said, still looking at his computer screen. But I noticed he wasn't typing or moving his mouse anymore. He was staring intently at a single spot behind his monitor. Tom, I said, narrowing my eyes. Who is the guy who works at the desk at the turnoff into the main workspace? Pale skin, thin, dark curly hair, I said, touching my temple, trying to show what his hair looked like. Oh, that's Sam, Tom replied, paying more attention to what I was asking. Why are you asking? Has he been bothering you? No, I said, trying to sound less interested than I really was. Have a good weekend, Tom. See ya, he said, watching me curiously as I walked away. All weekend, I thought about everything that had happened in my first week at work. It felt like Tom wasn't telling me something important. There was no reason for him to get so tense when I mentioned the girl who had worked there before me. Had someone complained about Sam before? Could it have been S. Brooks? Was Sam the reason for the survival guide in the notebook? Why did she quit? I had a million theories that bothered me as I tried to relax. Before I knew it, it was time to go back to work. This is where we're almost caught up to today. Yesterday was Monday, my first regular day shift. It flew by as I answered phones, took notes, sorted things, and assigned dozens of customer complaints in our system. I had to get used to it, and by the end of the day, I was completely exhausted. Just as I was signing off, I got another creepy text from a number I didn't recognize. You're such a hard worker. Can't wait to see you take on night shift. This time, I was really scared. I quickly looked around to see if Sam was still at work so I could confront him about sending the message, but he had already left for the day. After calming myself down, I went home and tried to find S. Brooks online. My best bet was LinkedIn, so I looked at all the women who listed Proficient Technologies on their profiles. There were surprisingly few. I couldn't find anything, so I checked Tom's list of friends and finally found what I was looking for. There was a girl named Sierra Brooks who said she was unemployed. I sent her a friend request with a message introducing myself and asking her if she had ever been bothered by one of her coworkers. Finally, feeling like I was making progress, I went to bed and got ready for my first night shift. I realized there were some good things about the irregular work schedule when I got to sleep in on Tuesday. I checked LinkedIn soon after I woke up around 1 p.m. Sierra hadn't responded yet, so I got ready for my first night shift at the office. I was a little nervous, but I was also excited to get to know the place better. Without the daytime crowd, I could walk around, eat cookies, and do whatever I wanted, even if it meant being rude to Sam. There were still a few people working late when I arrived for my shift, but I didn't pay much attention to them because I had a lot of calls and messages to deal with. 2 hours later, though, the calls, chats, and tickets started to slow down until they stopped completely around 11 p.m. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the workspace. As far as I could tell, everyone else had gone home. The lights were on, but when I took off my headphones, I heard a soft, jingling melody playing from somewhere. It sounded like a Christmas carol, but it was hard to tell where it was coming from. There was no reason to be scared, but I felt my hair stand on end. As I stood up from my chair, the melody stopped. Now, I've been scared by less in the past. Once, I thought a man was following me at night, but he actually just walked past me to the corner store. Even though I lived alone, I always double and triple checked my locks before going to bed. I had to admit that my fear was probably unfounded. Someone had probably left their headphones plugged into their computer with the music on. Or maybe there was a party for another company downstairs. You only hear scary music in horror movies, right? Right? Despite all my reasoning, I decided to check the office to make sure I was really alone. I walked through the rows of desks, realizing how lucky I was to have my own little corner spot. I couldn't imagine working so close to any of my annoying coworkers. I checked all the rows and went back to the front desk area, hanging out near Tom's desk, looking through his things for clues. I didn't find anything interesting, so I went back through the main room to the kitchen. My nerves were calming down, and I found myself spending more time tasting cookies than looking for enemies hiding behind curtains. I had to stop myself though, because the music started again while I was in the kitchen, and this time it was louder. At the same time, my work phone buzzed with a text from a random number. Finally got to the cookies, huh? My whole body froze as I processed what it meant. It was probably Sam, and he was messing with me. I listened closely. I couldn't see or hear anyone in the kitchen. And if Sam was in the main workspace, it wouldn't be hard for him to guess I was eating cookies. I breathed slowly, ignoring the melody and trying to hear anything else. Nothing. Slowly, I walked over to the kitchen drawers and found a big knife. Did I know how to use a knife? No. Would my wild swings keep an unarmed person away? Maybe. I was about to go into the workspace when I got a call on my work phone. I stayed against the wall in the kitchen, knife in hand, and answered with the usual greeting. There was static on the other end, some clanging sounds, and then complete silence. I looked at the phone and saw it had turned off. I tried to turn it back on, but it wouldn't work. Great, now I had to get back to my computer in case there were more calls. I remembered Sierra's guide as I put the dead phone in my pocket. Have Skype open with money in your account for emergencies in case you can't use your phone. Had that happened to her, too? The instructions in the notebook made a lot more sense, and I cursed myself out loud for not being prepared. As soon as the words left my mouth, there was another scary ping from the phone. I pulled it out and tried to unlock it, but the usual screen didn't come up. All I saw was a white screen with a few words on it. Tut tut, ladies really shouldn't use that sort of language. As soon as I read it, the screen went blank and more text appeared. Why don't you come out and play? Don't bother taking that knife with you. It won't do much against my gun. I threw the phone across the room and ran towards my computer. The melody got louder as I got closer to my desk, where I found a pink stuffed pig toy. There was a fabric button on its left foot with a music note on it. That was the source of the music, and it proved without a doubt that someone else was in the office. Even worse, they were watching my every move and trying to scare me with kids' toys. Panic started to take over my body. I needed to fight or run. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I hadn't heard any signs of someone moving around the office. I could hear city sounds from outside and the hum of the computers that someone had forgotten to shut off. If my stalker was moving, I needed to find them so I could plan my escape. I also had to get help, quickly. I moved the toy away and sat down at my desk, opening the Skype for Business app. I quickly dialed 911 and put the landline phone on speaker. The dial tone was short, and an operator answered almost immediately. I was about to explain everything quickly when someone grabbed my ankle from under the desk. I screamed as loud as I could, pulling my leg away and running as fast as I could. I heard some commotion behind me, followed by a loud bang, which I thought was my attacker chasing me. Before I knew it, I was running down 3 flights of stairs and rushing out the doors, past the surprised security guard. The cold air stung my skin through my thin sweater as I found a stranger and asked for help. They called 911, and the police arrived at the office within an hour. As I waited for them with the guard, I kept thinking about Sierra's warnings and how stupid I had been to ignore them. Check every aisle, meeting room. Don't forget to check under desks, balcony, kitchen tables, behind cooler. The police quickly got my story and, leaving me with a young officer, went upstairs to look around the office. No one had entered or left the building since I ran out, so maybe the attacker was still hiding somewhere. The thought made me feel sick, so I moved closer to my armed companion. Soon after the police left us, the young officer's radio crackled, and several voices talked over each other, asking for backup and using codes I didn't understand. Things changed quickly. Instead of going home, I was taken to the police station and held in an interrogation room for hours before anyone finally talked to me. I was tired, miserable, and confused about how things were unfolding. I wanted to go home, but I spent several more hours telling my story to 2 detectives. So, you had the knife with you when you ran from the kitchen to your desk? Are you sure? Asked the older detective, who said his name was Senior Investigator Barnshaw. Yes, I said nervously. I think I did. I was panicked, so it's hard to remember. And then there was the pig toy, I said, losing my train of thought. And you believe that the person who was harassing you was Samuel Guilford, said the other detective. I didn't remember his name. He wasn't wearing a badge. I don't know his full name, but I can't imagine anyone else would do this. And one more time, just for the record, what happened when you called 911? Barnshaw asked for the 3rd time that night. Someone grabbed my leg, my ankle, actually. This happened before I had a chance to tell the operator what was happening. I screamed and ran until I found a stranger outside who let me call for help, I said, getting tired of the same questions over and over. Samuel Guilford was found dead not far from your desk when our officers got there. Did you see his body when you were running out of the office? Asked the other detective, pretending to be innocent as he dropped this big news. My jaw dropped, and I stared at the detectives in shock and terror. No, I croaked. I don't understand. He was stabbed to death with a big kitchen knife. His body had 23 stab wounds, Barnshaw explained. And we found the knife stuck in his mouth, holding him to the floor through his throat. "We have reason to believe that it was the knife you described in your statement," the other detective added. I looked at both detectives without saying anything, struggling to focus when my mind felt like it was going blank. "Your story mostly checks out. We found his phone full of amateur hacking apps," the senior detective continued. "We also found several naked pictures of you and all the texts you mentioned. He had a gun in his hand, and we found the bullet he fired when you ran. What we don't understand is how he died," the other detective added, closely watching my reaction. "It's okay if you killed him to defend yourself, Gemma. The guy was a creep." I stammered. "I swear, I had no idea." "Oh, God," I cried out helplessly. "I mean, just a month ago, another coworker filed a report against him," Barnshaw said. "Sierra," I murmured. "You knew Miss Brooks?" the other detective asked, suspicion in his eyes. "No," I insisted. "I got her desk and her notebook. I should have mentioned it before." "What did the report say?" Barnshaw looked at my face and then met his partner's eye. They communicated without saying anything before deciding to tell me the terrible things that had happened to Sierra. Things that had almost happened to me. Sierra Brooks had gone straight to a nearby hospital after her first night shift 3 months ago. She had been badly beaten and bruised and wanted to register an anonymous rape kit. The damage to her reproductive organs was severe, and she had to get stitches. She filed a police report 2 months later when she failed her probationary period at Proficient Technologies and lost her job, her only way to pay for her medical bills. It was her word against Sam Guilford's, who had expensive lawyers and many coworkers who would say he was a good guy. Just yesterday, Miss Brooks dropped all the charges against Samuel, the younger detective said. "We're trying to find her and bring her in for questioning. I'm sure you understand why the fact that you know her name worries us." The police kept asking me questions until someone gave Barnshaw a note. Forensics had made a report about the fingerprints on the knife, as well as the blood patterns. I was asked to give some DNA samples to help the investigation and finally allowed to go home. At home, exhausted as I was, I couldn't sleep. I didn't have any of my belongings back. My purse, phone, and even coat were all evidence. So, I went to my old laptop, hoping that browsing the internet could calm my nerves. My browser was still open on LinkedIn from the day before, and I refreshed the page out of habit. There was a little red icon that showed I had a new message. Sierra had replied to me. "Don't worry, sis, I took care of it." Less than 3, https://www.reddit.com/r/peculi_dar/comments/candx/story_master_list/closing parenthesis.